I've written a special piece for this, principally because I wanted to try and do this for myself, actually. And I was asked by the Middle East School to try and put together a webinar for you. And I thought this was something I was interested in, so it might be something you're interested in as well. So this is something I've just done over the last few weeks, and I've been working on it actually off and on for about a year. And this is obviously something to do with the venture capital and private equity elective. And some of you will take that, and some of you are thinking about it, and some of you may have taken it. But the reality is that valuation is a critical issue of that particular elective. And of course, it's a very important part of your MBA program to understand what the value of businesses is and how to value them and the different metrics that you use. And I get asked all the time, by my colleagues and also by people I work with, how on earth do you value brand new and innovative enterprises? And of course, I'm going to ask you something else. Is there anything new under the sun? Is there anything such as a brand new, totally unique enterprise? I don't think so. Because the real serious question, is there anything really new about the companies which are leading the digital revolution? Because you're in the age of the digital revolution. Well, by the way, if you want to ask any questions, just put them on web chat, and my friend and colleague William will look at the web chat continually. And if there's something that comes up which is really interesting and that requires an immediate answer, we'll break off at that point and answer those questions. So don't be frightened to ask any questions at any time on web chat. Just put it on there, and he will break into this presentation. I'm very happy to have a very engaged and interactive presentation, because that's the way I like to work. And also Absolutely. It leads to some very interesting debate, because I'm sure some of you have got ideas. And it may well be that your ideas differ to mine, and that's even better. So let's think about what's new and what isn't. And let's draw upon, Winston Churchill, one of my heroes, said, I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said, but he said, if you don't take the lessons of the past, you'll repeat the failures in the future. So we've got to look back as well as looking forward. And in order to try and understand what's going on, it's always wise to look at a metaphor. There may be a metaphor for what's happening now, which can add some value in trying to understand what's going on. So, valuations in the age of the digital revolution. Now, I'm going to put in red the industrial revolution because I want to differentiate this. Of course, the industrial revolution happened in the UK. We've now gone post-industrial, as some of you may have realized. We've become very much service-oriented, and we're no longer the manufacturing power base that we were for the world. However, the Industrial Revolution started here, and it was the beginning of mass production, really. And the global trade in manufactured goods. The Industrial Revolution really was the time when the world woke up to the global trade in manufactured goods. Of course, trading's gone on forever. I mean, obviously before the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Romans, they traded spice, they traded, for example, clayware. They traded wine, they traded all sorts of things across vast stretches of the world. But the beginning of real mass production of manufactured goods happened in the Industrial Revolution. And the question is, how could you value companies in a brand new situation where all of a sudden you've got all this wonderful stuff being produced from factories which had never existed before in the way that they did then? And how do you value those companies? And of course, why is that relevant today? Because it is. Whenever there's a revolutionary, disruptive change, and the digital revolution is a disruptive change, it disrupts supply chains. Because what do I mean by disruptive? Well, what it does is it shakes up the existing status quo. In supply chains, you've got suppliers, you've got middlemen, and then you've got users. Now, the middlemen are getting squeezed out in the digital revolution. They aren't disappearing. They are being squeezed out unless they've got a real value add. But the big difference now is that we're jumping over to the client from the supplier or the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM. And all of a sudden, in these circumstances, old yardsticks of valuation are suddenly out of date because the cost base has changed. For example, in the old system of having a manufacturer, a distributor, and a client, the distributor would take 30% out of the gross margin. That's the way it worked. So that is not happening anymore because the distributor doesn't exist. you're jumping straight to the end user. So the cost base has changed, the returns have changed, pricing is reduced because the competition has increased, but nonetheless, the yardsticks we used to use for cash flow and for the management and the understanding of valuations are completely out of date. New metrics do emerge, of course, and as we start to see what works and what doesn't. I'm involved now in the digital businesses across the world, and I'm finding it very exciting to look at how they're valued. And also what's really exciting is the way that people's perception of value is becoming much more granular. As we get used to new metrics and new methods of doing business, it becomes much, much clearer where the value comes from. And then the metrics upon which we define the valuation become more sophisticated. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. So let's go back to the Industrial Revolution again, the good old days when the UK ruled the world. I'm joking, of course. In any time of immense change, there's always one factor which is critical to success, and that's the means of distribution. If the means of distribution are in place, you can do a lot. If you've got people manufacturing things, but they can't get them to the target market, you might as well not bother. So distribution has always been an issue. In the old days, it was, of course, by sailing. Well, first of all, it was by rowing boats, which wasn't a very good idea. Then, of course, we had sailing ships. Then we had canals. And then, of course, we had the really exciting stock in the 20th century, which was, of course, railways. This was a new, faster, and more efficient means to get goods and people, this is an important point, quickly from point to point. What couldn't be transferred in the past because it was going to go off, all of a sudden, farmers could get to bigger markets further away because the means of getting there was so much more efficient and speedy that you had enough shelf life to transfer from point to point. Also, it made possible to have centers of excellence in manufacturing. And of course, the real issue in the Industrial Revolution was to drive economies of scale. And the existence of efficient logistics systems allowed hubs and centers of excellence, like around Manchester. Manchester and Lancashire were the center of the spinning and weaving industry for the world. In fact, the price of cotton was set from Manchester for years and years. And the reason is we'd got a center of excellence, which was only allowed to be there because the distribution and logistics system were entirely appropriate and worked. Of course, in the early days, as always in the early days of a change, there's a huge stock market bubble for railways, which of course burst. The period of real frenzy was from the first commercial railway was in 1830, which was in Lancashire. And the period of frenzy sort of fizzled out in 1845, because by that time, the true returns from railways finally became clear. It's only 15 years, but it became a bit obvious that you couldn't have fragmentary railway companies. You'd have to consolidate. And of course, at this time, consolidating allowed scale to deliver more stable returns. Interestingly, just before this, 1830, in the UK, we'd actually repealed legislation which came from the days of the South Sea bubble, which was the great tulip stupidity. I'll come back to the parallels with tulip stupidity in a minute. We'd repealed the legislation so that people could just buy a portion of a share. So if a share was £100, for example, you could buy that share for £10 now and own £90 to the issuer of the share, which was a railway company. That railway company, however, had the right to claim the £90 at any point in time when they needed the capital. So people were buying shares, leveraging their ability to buy shares by only buying 10% of them. And what they didn't think of was that they had to pay the 90% at some point in time. So consequently, a lot of people went bust because they'd bought shares they couldn't afford. When the cash call came in, they couldn't buy. This is reminiscent of what's going to happen shortly. So let's talk a bit about the digital revolution, which really started, I mean, let's be honest, it started in the West, started in the US specifically. And you could argue that the birth of the Industrial Revolution owes a lot to Kahn and Cerf, who in 1971 developed transmission control and internet protocol, which in itself didn't achieve very much, but was the beginnings of the digital revolution because it allowed the framework to be developed in such a way that finally in 1989, Sir Tim Berners-Lee gave the World Wide Web to the world, and www in front of everything, by the way, is World Wide Web, and this dates back to 1989. So Tim Berners-Lee gave this invention to the world, and that's when it became possible to browse the web. Until then, it was pretty useless for ordinary people. You couldn't really browse it, but the first web browser was the World Wide Web. Bit crude, wasn't like what we've got today, but it did allow cruising across the web, and it was the beginnings of the digital revolution for mass transit. It was the beginning of the growth of the digital commerce enterprise. Now, round about the 1990s, the first bubble in communications happened, and this is all relevant to what I'm going to discuss now, because it's all about communicating a different way. And telecoms companies, in particular Vodafone, which is now a bit of a waste of time, were on fire in the 1990s as investors began to see the growth opportunities in mobile telephony. But how did people value them? Nobody had any idea what they were worth, because it was brand new, in inverted commas. It was brand new. It was mobile telephony. No one had ever seen what this could do before. We all had lots of assumptions about how it might revolutionize commerce and how about revolutionize the way we do things, give us access to the net. People were thinking about this in the 90s. Initially, growth was the only metric. So in other words, the number of new clients each quarter, a bit like Netflix, think about that. It's all about the number of new clients a quarter, was the real way to value these businesses. And all of a sudden, that wasn't granular enough, because we learned a bit about the returns, then churn, in other words, how many do you lose as well as how many do you gain? And finally, ARPU, average revenue per unit, became relevant. In other words, how much is each phone generating in revenue? That's a major significant number. Once you get through the initial hype and the initial hype growth phase, you've got to monetize. So ARPU becomes relevant. At the beginning, you look for growth. You worry about monetizing later. Then when you've got the growth and you're starting to get a bit more mature, then you've got to monetize. This is happening to WhatsApp today. This is why Facebook is trying to monetize WhatsApp, which he bought for 20 billion plus, hasn't made any money out of, and is trying to use the information from WhatsApp accounts to generate cash. Beware of that if you're a WhatsApp user, by the way. They're going to use your information and sell it. So in terms of telecoms, the 1990s was very exciting. Vodafone in particular was a real growth stock. It was the first company to have a hostile takeover in Germany of management. It issued a whole load of stock to buy it, not money, stock, and consequently had a 50 billion write down. Billion, not million. These telephony companies, I mean, Nokia, remember Nokia? Irrelevant today, you know, all these companies that were all go at that point in time are now largely irrelevant because of voice over internet protocol. I mean, who would want to use a mobile phone when you can use one of the, like Signal or WhatsApp or WeChat? Why would you want to do that? Or Zoom? So they're largely irrelevant now. They're trying to become more relevant again through 5G, but they're going to fail. So valuations in the age of the digital revolution. I thought, well, what can I use as a metaphor? And I thought of NASDAQ. So if I look at NASDAQ, which is the US obviously version of basically a digital stock exchange. It's not quite digital, but it's got enough in there to make it worthwhile as a metaphor. And I thought I'd look at the growth in value of digital stocks over time. It might also be interesting to look at this and compare it with global macro trends to see if there's any kind of convergence, if there's a relationship between the value of digital shares and the growth in the world market, because there ought to be. So this is what NASDAQ has done. Now you'll notice 2000 to 2002 is the great dot-com bubble burst. That was a $5 trillion wipeout for investors over a 2-year period. And you can see what happened in 1999, 2000. See that? Is that reminiscent of today? You might want to think about that. Then there was a real reconfiguration of valuation then. Then there was, as always, the pendulum swings too far. Swung too far up again, then it came down. It's bounced about. big loss of value in 2008, 2009 during the credit crunch in the western part of the world. And it's risen since then with one or two minor blips. And it's now in a situation where it doesn't know quite where it's going to go, because the NASDAQ at the moment is bouncing about because of the resurgence of the normal economy, because we seem to be emerging from a COVID disaster. So I thought, well, let's have a look and see how that compares with global macro growth. Well, this is the growth in GDP of the world over time. You'll notice there's a dip in 2000. That's the dot-com bubble time. Bounces about. Big dip 2009-10. Same there. Then it sort of bounces about a bit, and it's sort of flat, and then it's obviously gone down with COVID, and it's going to go back up again shortly. And that's more or less what we've seen with the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ's risen a bit more because of one or two innovative ideas that came out. But in terms of the overall macro trends, it is not divorced from the global marketplace. So there's some logic in the valuation of digital companies over time. It's not divorced from reality. It's based upon what's actually going on in the real world, because the digital economy is merely a transition away from the industrial and towards the digital. It's still got to monetize. At some point in time, it's going to monetize. If it doesn't monetize, well, it goes. So clearly there's a connection between the overall value of digital stocks and the macro market. At the moment, lockdown has been a bit of a game changer, but I think we might see a bit of a swing back. All the large companies in the world are trying to figure out if people's move towards digital solutions is going to be continuing, or is it going to slip back into the old methodology of going to bricks and mortars. The smart money is that there's been 5 years growth in 3 months. Some of that will be relinquished, but people's attitudes towards going to the shops have changed, especially the younger generation, and they're not likely to return to where they were before, and they really like delivery online. And there's no reason, and the same with work, there's no reason why people want to go back to work again if they've got a choice. And everything I'm seeing in the digital economy is that everyone's thinking, we're going to have to go back to work some of the time, but not all of the time. So we're going to see a slow drift back to some of the old ways, but we're not going to go back to where we were before. It's likened to a balloon, you know. When you buy a balloon, it's one shape, you blow it up, and if you let the air out, it never goes back to where it was before. And I think that's what's going to happen after COVID to the change from the industrial to the digital revolution. And as I've said, is it going to continue? Is the big question mark. And the big money is that it's going to change a little bit, but it's going to continue, but not at the same pace. So let's talk about the corporate digital revolution and the rise of SaaS. I'm going to stop in a minute to ask you a few questions in case you're getting bored. I don't blame you if you are. But the reality is I'm going to ask you a few questions about what you think is going to happen next. It's going to affect you a lot. Now, SaaS is software as a service. And I regard this as equivalent to oil in the engine of the industrial revolution. You don't have to buy stuff from IBM or SAP anymore. You don't have to go and spend $500,000 as a buy-in price and God knows what per month for their old-fashioned systems. No, now you can buy what you want on the drip, so much a month. I mean, Intuit's a good example of this. QuickBooks, Xero, XERO is a good example of this. And there's examples all around the world. But there's an awful lot of companies out there that are offering monthly rentals of very advanced software systems, which allow you to target your product at the market more efficiently. And that's SaaS. Of course, the biggest business today, which we regard as a SaaS business, started in 1999, is Salesforce. And the guy who runs Salesforce came out of Oracle. Now, fact is, Salesforce is, it's tipped to be the first $1 trillion SaaS business. We'll see. They made a big purchase recently. Some of you may have read about Salesforce buying Slack for an awful lot of money, well, an awful lot of shares. And Slack was valued very highly indeed. It remains to be seen whether the creative value or destroyed it. On evidence of the past, they're probably going to destroy some value, but what they're looking for is revenue. Salesforce is seeking more and better revenue streams, and that's why they bought into Slack. Now, Salesforce is a real SaaS business. It's a business which allows small companies to access very sophisticated software, and it's at the heart of the way that people connect with their clients. And that's where the money is. The money's in revenue and sales. Look, you can't save yourself rich. You can't cut costs faster than a fall in your sales. So you've got to keep your sales moving forward. You know, a rising tide lifts all boats, of course, but the best players rise whether the tide's going in or out. They'll rise less when it's going out, but they'll still rise. And Salesforce and companies like that are trying to find digital ways of connecting suppliers with their customers in efficient digital means, which are elastic and robust in any given circumstance. Question is, how do you value a SaaS business? One of these businesses, I mean, it's not like it's selling you a car. When you buy Salesforce.com, you're buying software. It's from the cloud. It drops in from the cloud. It's upgraded from the cloud. It doesn't cost them a lot to service you. Let's talk about immature companies first. Let's not look immediately at Salesforce.com. Let's look at more immature companies that are just starting out. I've been involved with several. I'm involved with 2 now. And valuing them is complex because they're inherently unpredictable. Now, there's a great book being written recently called Radical Uncertainty by Mervyn King, the ex-governor of the Bank of England and a very well-known American academic. Very good book indeed. And they talk about mysteries and puzzles. Now, trying to value an existing business is a puzzle. It's not easy, but there are algorithms out there you can use. For example, an existing big business, you can use EBITDA multiples or DCF. DCF less so, but EBITDA definitely very often is a multiple you can use. So a multiple of EBITDA gives you a reasonable valuation of the enterprise in existing businesses that have been extant for a while. And that's like a crossword puzzle. There is a solution. It's maybe difficult, but there is a solution. Now, with a young company that's just breaking into a market and maybe offering a digital solution where there hasn't been one before, is a puzzle. And it's a mystery. It's a puzzle insofar that at one point in time, you will be able to understand how to value it. But at this point in time, it's a mystery on its way to being a puzzle. Because at the very beginning, you don't even know if it's going to exist in 2 years' time. And most startups don't make it. So when venture capitalists, for example, and people with money are trying to value young startups, it's a mystery. And they've got to have there's a large element of intuition goes into this and belief in the owners. There's a lot of evidence about this. So early on, it's a man's game or a woman's game to value these young businesses because it's a mystery, because there's no known algorithm which applies to very young businesses. And the consequences of a lack of maturity and lack of predictability is that the old models of EBITDA and DCF are not relevant at all. Not at all, because EBITDA is probably negative and DCF's meaningless when you're burning cash. So how are we going to value them? We need to find a proxy for cash, something that looks like cash, which of course in mature businesses, we use EBITDA and DCF because they've got real cash flow. In young businesses, we've got to find something which looks like cash. And what do we do? What do we do with this in this situation? I'm going to use SaaS as an example because it's a good example and it's a growing business market and business place. It's kind of not young anymore, but it's not old either. Essentially, SaaS businesses export the risk to their financial backers because they use investors' funds to try and build sales as quickly as possible. And why is this attractive to investors? Well, it's because gross margins on these incremental sales is typically 95%, but is over 90% on any good SaaS business. So in a real sense, increasing revenue is a great proxy for cash, because for every extra dollar you sell, you keep 90 cents. So if you get new clients, you're immediately dropping cash to the bottom line. It's a race for market share with SaaS. Otherwise, if you don't get market share, you're dead. Look, there isn't going to be another Salesforce. It's camped out. Of course, there are other CRMs and lots of small ones, but Salesforce is the 800-pound gorilla. There's not going to be another 800-pound gorilla, not in the West anyway. So therefore, growth is the key issue. Once you've got the growth in your market share and once you've gained dominance, then everything begins to unfold and you start to generate real cash. So in a real sense, revenue is a proxy for cash. So young SaaS businesses are valued on a multiple of revenue or a multiple of sales, not EBITDA, not cash flow, nothing else. Purely a multiple of sales. Slack, for example, which was sold recently, was valued at 50 times this year's revenue. 50 times the revenue. Typically, for a small business, small SaaS startup that isn't as sexy as Slack was, you're talking between 3 and 5 times revenue, and a really good one, 20 times revenue. 50 was a bit excessive, and it was a great business. So the multiple you choose to use as a multiple of revenue is a function of the quality of earnings and the past and projected growth rate. Is any questions come up there? I noticed 1 or 2 chat comments have come through, William. Any questions?
Yeah, Malcolm, we've got one here which is pretty much related to this as well, but related to cyber attacks and how that has an impact on valuations. So to be more clear, it's digital businesses are very vulnerable to cyber attacks and potential future regulation and high risk. So what's the impact on valuations?
Well, every business in the world is subject to a cyber attack. SMEs, especially small businesses that aren't very savvy, are extraordinarily, shall we say, open to cyber attack. As you might actually, SaaS businesses are quite clever when it comes to cyber attacks because they are necessarily digitally aware. So actually, the real businesses which are at risk from cyber attacks are those that are not very aware of what's possible in the digital world. SaaS businesses are, by definition, because they live in the digital world, and they are very savvy in terms of what potential attacks can be. I'll come back to that. It's a very relevant point. But in fact, the real issue today is for people with large databases in businesses which are very dispersed and have lots of legacy systems. Does that make you think about banks, airlines, people like that? So, yes, another question from...
Yes, Malcolm, we've got another one here. Well, it's more of a comment saying that they do believe that Slack was overvalued as well. So if you may want to expand a bit more as to why Slack was so overvalued.
Somebody in the audience believes that Slack was overvalued. So upon what basis to make that extraordinary judgment? Because a business is worth what somebody pays for it. I remember when Instagram was sold for $1 billion, and everybody said that was far too much. I'm going to ask you a question. Was it? I remember when YouTube was bought by Google, and everybody thought that was an expensive deal. Was it? You've got to be careful about making judgments when you haven't got the techniques in your head to make those judgments. I'm going to kind of say this, the guys who've just bought Slack are rather smart people. Don't think they make too many mistakes. And they may be optimistic and they may be proved ultimately wrong, but you've got to think carefully before making those really rather grandiose statements. The Slack was overvalued, because at the end of the day, we will see. But I'm going to try and talk to you about how you might consider whether the valuation is overvalued or not, because I don't know whether Slack's valued at the right amount of money. I do know one thing. I wish I'd been in there earlier on, and that is a fact.
Absolutely, they may prove us wrong in future, definitely. And I think there's just one more if you'd like to take it now, Malcolm. Yeah. It's related to digital business as well. So you gave the example of SaaS businesses, but someone's now talking about education as a field as well, and technology related to education, and how different is it to value businesses within that particular field as well? Is there some sort of differentiating factors that they need to take into account?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, actually. Education, well, I'm going to come, if I may, I'll return to that later on, because it's a very good question, which I don't want to waste. I don't want to waste that question. I want to save it for later, because it comes back to something I'm going to bring up, because I really like that question. So how are we going to value these businesses? Perceived, no, the word is perceived, isn't it? Perceived qualities are related to a number of factors. But these are my view. Well, it's not just mine. This is what the market considers. If you're a SaaS business, for example, duration of your contracts is very relevant. If you've got 1 month contracts, you're at risk. If you've got 2-year contracts, you've got predictability. The churn percentage. Well, what does churn mean? A typical SaaS business will lose 2 or 3% of its customer base per month. And churn percentage is, of course, a proxy for lifetime value, because the lower the churn, the more the lifetime value. Because by definition, if you've got a 2% churn rate, it's the average life of a client is 50 months. If you've got a 4% churn rate, it's 25. So the higher the churn, the less the lifetime value. The lower the churn, the more sticky the client is. So churn percentage combined with growth is a very important metric for value. The cost of acquisition of a client, the time to recoup it. This is just coming out of the West now. The VCs in the West Coast are looking very closely at this. This is fairly interesting and new stuff. And a company I've just been involved in has just been sold to American business, and I've learned a lot from the way they value this. And they were looking very closely at the cost of client acquisition and how long it took us to get that back. Now, if you're into enterprise clients, for example, like HubSpot, some of you may have heard of HubSpot. HubSpot may well take 18 months to get the money back on a new client. But the fact of the matter is that new client lasts for years and years and years. So the payback, although it's a long payback in the first instance, the lifetime value compared to the client acquisition cost is very good. Young companies, if your client acquisition cost is recouped within 6 months, you're regarded as a very, very hot property, because you're churning cash really quickly. In other words, the money you spend on acquiring businesses is being returned within the year. So keep investing. Company growth rate is important, especially in the context of the expected growth of the sector. And these factors are critical decision makers, because growth and revenue are obviously very related, and revenue is at the heart of the valuation of these businesses. And of course, the management record is really important. What have these guys done before? What are they capable of? What do we think about them? Do we trust them? These are considerably important things. The less important an acquisition point, the more important an investment time. So, given that we've now got some proxies for value, the important issue, and this is your point about the valuation of Slack, is to mitigate the risk of overvaluing the asset. And you've got to look at the company in the context of its market. We need to find a lookalike. There's nothing new in the world, nothing new. It's something that comes along today, there's been something like it in the past. It may not be obvious, but it's been fulfilling the same function. It might be a very different product, but it does the same thing. Therefore, it's a lookalike. So you've got things you can look at in the ecosystem that are similar to this new product, and this is what VCs do. They look for similarities. And for example, Uber. Well, in the past you just used to get your whistle out and blow for a taxi. Well, what's new about it? It's just a digital whistle, isn't it? So this means studying the deals which have taken place in the sector in order to give you some metrics that you can then place around this company to find a valuation metric which gives you an indication of the real value. Now, this way of measuring the value varies sector by sector, and professional investors, and we've got professional investors who help us on the VCPE program. And if you do it, you'll be exposed to the way they do the real today methodologies, not like from a book 10 years ago, what they're doing today. And they use statistical techniques to relate turnover, for example, or EBITDA margin to market value, and they look for the line of best fit to find out which button gives you the best valuation metric. So this isn't actually random. There's a bit of thinking goes into this. Initially, when you invest in a company, it is random. Do I like the guy? Do I like the product? Do I think it's scalable? Yes, take, buy. But after you've got going a bit and you've developed revenue and you've got continuous business and you've got churn numbers worked out, you know the cost of client acquisition, you know the lifetime value, you can start to churn out a real expectation of value. The unknown, and this is what affected Slack, is the growth potential from a point in time. You know what's happened. What you've got to figure out is what's going to happen. And that's the tricky bit. One of the things you've got to realize is the investor's risk appetite for risk is a significant factor, because this is obviously going to impact upon their pricing. If they like the market that it's in, like the people, they'll often pay a lot of money because they think the risk has been diminished because it's got two big ticks. There's also the emotional impact of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Look at Coinbase. Dare I say it, look at Bitcoin, which took a bit of a kick in yesterday, as did various other of these esoteric little games that people play, when the Chinese all of a sudden say, well, we're not too keen on this sort of thing. We're just going to put a break on it. Now, I don't think that's going to kill cryptocurrencies, but I think it exposes their volatility and their risk associated with the fact they're not built on any great intrinsic value. They're built upon people's expectations of what it might be worth, and also it's built on greed. To summarize, if you're going to figure out what something's worth, you've got to find not only proxies for valuation, which are akin to tools for more mature entities. You've got to employ risk mitigation models to try and get a range of values, in other words, statistical models, which say, well, it's worth between X and Y. Do I fancy it or not? What's my hurdle for risk? If I'm prepared to take more risk, it's worth more money. If I don't like it and I'm prepared to take less risk, it's worth less money. So in fact, these businesses, like every other business in the world, are a function of what people think they're worth, but more importantly, a function of the risk that the investor is prepared to take in investing in that company. So two different investors will come up with very different valuations depending upon their experience and their risk profile. In other words, if an investor gets their money from a very risk-averse source, like maybe an insurance company, they're going to have a totally different appetite for risk for someone who gets all their money from entrepreneurs or people who see this as part of a high-risk end of a large portfolio. So you get very different valuations depending upon the risk-averse or the risk-seeking attitude of the investor. Right. Let's talk about the 2020s. Now, the valuations of current IPOs are pretty staggering. And of course, COVID has made a big difference to that in terms of digital. And a lot of companies are rushing to market while it's very sexy, of course. And of course, cryptocurrencies capture the imagination of everyone. I was offered Bitcoins in 2009 by a developer friend of mine. And he said, what do you think about these Bitcoins? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he tried to explain to me, and I still didn't really get it. I didn't really fancy it because at that time it was used. Look, in the early days, Bitcoin was a home for black money, for money which you shouldn't have had, from people from all over the world who had money they were trying to hide. I'm not saying that's the way it is now. I'm saying that's how it started out. And of course, that was a bit unsavory. And I didn't really want to get involved with that. And my friend didn't either. But if we'd invested 500 euros each, we were worth somewhere like 50 million at least now, maybe 500 million. But there we go. I'm not too bothered about that. But the reality is you make a choice and you decide whether it's for you or not. Now, at the moment, a lot of people are jumping on cryptocurrencies because they think it's a one-way street. No, it isn't. Let's look at DoorDash. DoorDash is a very large door-to-door delivery company, basically bikes, in the US, which has got 60% of the market in large parts of the US. Very, very go-go company, founded in 2013, lost money consistently since the outset. even in the pandemic, lost money, and was floated in December 2020 at $33 billion. And we will see how that does, especially now that in the US in particular, it's starting to go back to normal again. Coinbase, of course, trades cryptocurrencies and it's trading on the back of cryptocurrencies, was founded in 2012, floated on April 14th, 2021 at a valuation of 86 billion and changing rapidly, very volatile, because it's resting on the back of cryptocurrencies. DoorDash is based upon an expectation of future growth in the home delivery market. Coinbase is based upon the fact that more and more people will trade in cryptocurrencies. In other words, they're both predicated on growth, which may or may not happen, but it's all about growth. And in DoorDash's case, market share, and in Coinbase's case, market share as well. So it's not just growth, it's a bit more granular than that. Now, I'm going to ask you a question now because you've been very good. You've listened to me for a long time. Let's think about this. Looking forward, what do you think? I'm going to ask you to put this on web chat. What do you think are going to be the growth sectors of the next 10 years? Where do you think the growth's going to be? And what do you think the 3 or 4 really sexy sectors that are going to generate huge valuations and are going to get heavily invested? And there's a lot of focus on these areas. Tell me what you think they're going to be. And then we'll see whether there's some kind of consensus. I'll leave William to do the hard yards to have a look at your answers. But come on, Noz, there's 45 of you thereabouts. We've only got 11, 12 so far. Yeah, we've got 15 now. That's better now. Come on, let's have you thinking. Where do you think the growth is going to be in the next 10 years? Because this is going to affect you. Very much so, because it's going to affect your lives, the way you earn your lives, you live in, the direction your life goes in, and of course, the value of your pension funds, if you've got them, or the pensions you're going to have. Very important. This is a critical factor, and it's going to be, and it's the big question today. Where's the growth going to be? Because the big money is made by seeing where the growth is going to be, not where it's been.
So we've got a couple here already, Malcolm, if you'd like us to go through them. So we've got e-commerce. That seems to be coming up quite a lot. We've got online gaming. We've got cloud technology. We've got cybersecurity, fintech, edtech. We've got cybersecurity seems to be coming up quite a lot. Healthcare, online education, autonomous vehicles, IT companies with a focus on cloud, software, blockchain.
Okay, yeah, they're all the usual sort of culprits.
Yes.
See, I think cloud's done, right? Cloud's done. We know about cloud. It's just a means of getting from A to B to C. The use of servers has been really exciting for AWS, Amazon, or Amazon services. Amazon's made a lot of money, as indeed as, of course, Microsoft, out of their cloud-based server business, which has allowed you to rent servers, which has made a huge difference. And this has been part of the growth in the digital revolution because we've all got access to the infrastructure now. These are one or two things I've come up with, and I want to debate them with you, right? Cybersecurity, which is like insurance. Yes, I agree. It's not the biggest. I'm just including it because it's going to be big. Companies like Darktrace are coming up now, and all sorts of new businesses you're going to see in cybersecurity. But that is going to become more important rather than less because everything's related to cyber business. So yeah, that's going to be. But it's got to think of that as an insurance policy. It's not going to be the biggest part of the market, but it's going to be important. Now, look, green energy solutions. And I'm thinking carbon capture is the new fusion. Some of you may have heard of nuclear fusion, which was a big thing in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then died because no one thought it was possible. Well, anything that finds a way of genuinely capturing carbon, and that's going to save the world, is going to make a huge amount of money. anybody can come up with a genuine solution to that problem is going to make a phenomenal amount of money. Now, one of these is, of course, hydrogen, because burning hydrogen just gives you water. So anything that can find ways of taking fuel, because we're going to need fuel whether we like it or not, anything that can generate power from something that isn't going to create carbon dioxide is going to be really important. And anything that can actually mop up the carbon that's extant in the actual atmosphere now is hugely important, because we've got to repair the damage before we move forward. Not only have we got to go to zero carbon, we've got to get rid of the carbon that's in the atmosphere. So that's hugely important. And fintech generally, because banks are going to have to liberate the transfer of funds, they're going to have to open up their APIs. They've got no choice. It's been regulated around the world. They're going to have to let other people connect to them, so that, in fact, for example, good examples, QuickBooks, you can actually interrogate your bank account from within QuickBooks because they've connected to the banks. Now, there's going to be more and more and more of this, because the banks are losing the monopoly on money, thank goodness, because they made a right mess of it anyway. And fintech, or what I'll call personal solutions to banking problems that allows you to have more control, are going to become more and more important. It's critically important. As a few of you mentioned things like education. Yes, it's important. Is it going to really ring my bell? Not so sure about that. It's a kind of a way, instead of teaching face-to-face, it's going to become bigger. How do you value it? Well, you've got to look at the target market. You've got to look at how sticky those clients are. Is it a transactional relationship, or is it something that continues over time? It kind of looks transactional to me. And it's things that continue over time that actually add value to businesses, because you can predict those over time. So, okay, educational methodologies are going to change because the whole world's changing, but I'm not really excited about it. I think green energy solutions is probably the most exciting thing for me at the moment, because it's kind of really important. I'm going to get, because carbon dioxide is the world's pandemic. It just is. And finally, the industrialized nations have realized it. Carbon dioxide is our long-running epidemic, our pandemic. And we've got to find a solution for that. We've got to vaccinate the earth against carbon. And if we can solve that problem, we're a long way to going forward. So, anybody disagree with any of those? Anybody got something that's even better than that? Come on, anybody think of something?
Ray got that right. So he did say CO2 capture before you actually showed that slide, and he also mentioned clean fuel. So that's something there as well. There's some who mention agribusiness as well as AI and machine learning, of course.
Well, machine learning is kind of an interesting one, isn't it? There's a lot of nonsense talked about machine learning. AI is AI is supposed to mean artificial intelligence. Most of it's augmented intelligence, actually. It's kind of using algorithms to make more of things, to make more use of data. And this whole story of big data and the use of big data. Well, tell me a company that's really monetized big data in a big way today. A lot of people pretend they're doing it. A lot of people have got all sorts of money tied up in databases and they play with them. But it's at its infancy. And artificial intelligence, of course, quantum computers are going to change the game. I might have talked about quantum computers, but who knows? We'll see about that. Obviously, the key issue here is how much of our autonomy are we going to give to machines? Because that's going to be a question we're all going to have to answer in the next 10 years. Because there's a lot of stuff happening with machines now that looks rather like messing about with genes and gene technology. It looks rather close to getting very, very difficult areas of probity. And I'm just kind of flagging up in advance, the whole thing about man against machine. I can see that happening in the next 20 years, especially as we develop more intelligent solutions to the AI problem. And the new chips that are coming along are disturbingly like something out of the Exterminator movies, because of their power and their size and their abilities.
I believe you're referring to some of the technology that Elon Musk is developing, Malcolm.
Well, Elon Musk thinks he's developing everything. Whether it is or not is another issue. But of course, nanotechnology and the use of graphene, and of course, Manchester's big with graphene, could be interesting areas. But I think green energy solutions, really important. Cybersecurity, yes, but whether it's going to be major, I'm not sure. Fintech is and is going to be important as we transfer. And of course, for fintech, read cryptocurrencies, same thing. And of course, I think the biggest growth is going to be in government-sponsored versions of Bitcoin. We're already talking in the UK about having a Britcoin, because governments are not going to relinquish control of their currency. That's not going to happen. It never will. And they can stop it because they can regulate it. And you can't say, well, you can't regulate cryptocurrencies. Just look at what the Chinese did. They just put a shot across the bows. And that was just the first shot. They didn't really try very hard.
Absolutely.
Any other comments?
I think it'd be interesting, maybe, Malcolm, to get your thoughts as well on Uber investing in sorry, not Uber. Well, Elon Musk, sorry, in Tesla investing in Bitcoin as well, and how that impacts any other company looking into these cryptocurrencies. One
of the big flip-flops of the last 5 years really has been his immediate acceptance of Bitcoins, and then saying, no, you can't use them. And the excuse he gave he couldn't use Bitcoins to buy the Tesla is that they were very carbon heavy, which of course they are. They're one of the most dirty products in the world in terms of carbon use, because of all the power that's generated by the farms that are backing up Bitcoin. So I don't think I take too much notice to everything that Mr. Musk does on a day-to-day basis and in his various tweets and Twitters. But the fact of the matter is that cryptocurrencies in their current form are going to morph into something which is going to go mainstream. And everyone accepts that. It's a fact. The question is, who will be in charge? And who's going to call the shots? And I can't see that being outside some kind of governmental influence, because governments can't afford to lose control of currencies. They can't afford to lose control of cash flows. It's just something that opens up all sorts of dangerous avenues. You can get away from paying tax. You can get away from paying tariffs. You can get away from paying all sorts of various charges that are made by various governments. It opens up a whole area which is not going to help us, actually, because if we create this black economy via cryptocurrencies, which isn't controlled by anyone and doesn't have any allegiance to anyone, then I could see that being a problem. I don't think that means there's anything wrong with fintech. I'm just saying totally unregulated fintech is a dangerous area to go down. And I think that's the problem at the moment with cryptocurrencies.
Absolutely, and that's a point to reflect on, absolutely, Malcolm. And I think we've got a question here. Oh, we've just lost it. I'll get back to it. Yes, so do you see AI and the new mRNA-style drugs being a growth area? Yes.
And in fact, interestingly enough, one of the companies I'm involved with is involved with this, the Genome Project in the UK. UK is very strong on genetics and being able to identify strains of genes. And what's going on right now, I mean, healthcare is going to be without question one of the biggest areas of growth in terms of digital growth over the next 20 years. I deliberately didn't include that because I was hoping somebody would bring it out, and some of you did. Healthcare, look, what's going to happen is people are going to be targeting the drugs at specific genes in the future. And also, we're going to be targeting the use of antibiotics, very specific antibiotics at very specific viruses or bacteria. And vaccines like mRNA are the way forward. There's no question about that. It's changed the game. And always when you get a cathartic moment like the pandemic, things happen. Necessity is the mother of invention. And when you get the pandemic, solutions which wouldn't have been possible all of a sudden become everyday. And people communicating in the way that they have over this disaster is unprecedented. And the consequence of that is that the way we're going to go forward has been accelerated dramatically by the discoveries of the last 2 years and probably the next 12 months as well. So yes, I think we're going to see much more targeted solutions to healthcare problems. And I think the use of artificial intelligence within that is going to be important, but I think it's going to be used in one specific area. It's going to be looking for symptoms. The days of having a radiologist looking at every result from every chest, they're going to be numbered very shortly, because AI has already been proved to be very efficient at spotting anomalies on tests, and it kicks out the anomalies for someone to look at, and that gets rid of most of the grunt work in identifying particular issues after anyone's had a test for whatever problem they might have. So yes, there's a huge future for digital in the healthcare world. And of course, as we're all getting older, that means the growth market is almost exponential. And being in that digital space is critical in healthcare.
Brilliant. Thank you for that answer, Malcolm. I think we'll take one more here from Hussein.
Could I get one more?
So he's stating that many regulators are still standing against cloud software as well. So what could change in the future to push the regulators to sort of allow cloud in their territories?
Money. That's it, money. If you're not part of the revolution, you're part of the past. If you don't move with the way the world's moving, you're going backwards, you're not going forwards. Look, you can't ignore, it's like the Luddites in the early days of the Industrial Revolution. Some people were trying to smash the machines because they thought they were stopping people having any kind of life. And of course, that was an ultimately futile thing to do. When things change, they've changed forever. You can't go back to some sylvan delight whereby we all used to wander about in sort of rags and cloths and lived in some kind of Garden of Eden, which never existed, by the way. If your region is fighting against cloud, in 5 years' time it won't be, or it will be less of an important part of the economic future of the world than it is today. Because cloud-based solutions are at the heart of the modern economy. And without those kind of solutions, you are actually trying to compete with people who are better, faster, cheaper, and more efficient than you are. So you can choose to ignore what's happening if you wish, but the end result of that will be you will be out of money and people will race past you. That's the way it is. That's the way it works.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for these answers, Malcolm, and for the fantastic presentation.
I'll move on quickly.
Yes, sure, please.
The last few. Common sense pointers to value. Look at the need being addressed. Is it currently met by an old model? Is the market fragmented? Is there an existing large market? Very excited. Is the market growing? Very exciting. Does your product have a clear market fit? And can people understand it? Because if they can't understand it, they won't use it. What does it cost to acquire a client? And how easy it is to monetize the product? WhatsApp, 22 billion, no money. Facebook trying to change that. Real value is in trying to find a more convenient and cheaper route to the customer. Amazon and Alibaba, great examples. Easy to understand models such as Uber rapidly gain traction and equally rapidly attacked by Me Too's. And Uber's up against Lyft and all sorts of people. All around the world, people are attacking Uber. And Uber got kicked out of China. The fact of the matter is, it's got to have something a bit more than just a basic functionality. It's got to have a reason. For example, WeChat's a fantastic platform because you can do anything on it. You can transfer money, you can do all sorts. The problem is it's being monitored, of course. It's not encrypted, but it's a great platform. There can only be one dominant platform. That's the issue when it comes to social media platforms. WeChat's a great example again. WhatsApp, well, we'll see. Signal might overtake WhatsApp. We don't know yet. Facebook, of course, has been dominant, still is, despite the fact it's not a very nice company. And you might think I shouldn't say that, but the reality is it does lots of things it says it isn't going to do, but it still does them. And Zuckerberg, well, people have doubts about Zuckerberg and his integrity. Whether they're right or not, time will tell. When the owner tries to monetize the platform, and I've said WhatsApp again, look out for challenges, in this case, Signal. So you've got to be careful. If it's not easy to monetize and it's not obvious how to do it, and you try it, you're opening the door to somebody coming in. And that's an issue you might want to think about. So those are the things I'm trying to, I'm not going to give you a definitive answer because there is none. However, I've given you some ways, some things to look at, which might point you in the direction of value. And if you want to know a lot more about this, then come on the elective. We spend a lot of time discussing this, and we do a little bit more statistical analysis. But these are common sense things you've got to think about. Do I like this company? Why? What's the competition? Who are they? Why is my solution better than theirs? Does the client understand what I'm doing? Can I explain it quickly? Is it expensive to get to that client? Am I going to make a lot of money out of them? These are the key issues in deciding what something's worth. As to whether Slack's worth being paid for it by Salesforce, it obviously was worth it to Salesforce. It remains to be seen whether the Salesforce investors receive a dividend from that. Who knows? In 5 years' time, we'll probably know. But I can tell you now, Instagram was a fantastic buy. YouTube was a fantastic buy. A lot of these buys have been amazingly transformational for the businesses that bought them. We will see in future whether that continues. But if you make the right buy, the price is almost irrelevant. If you've got growth and you've got a platform which is fit for purpose, you can make money. If you buy something cheap that's doesn't form a useful function in the market, you've just wasted your money. Anyway, that's me done. Unless anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to finish there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Malcolm. I'm just conscious of time, but we had a couple of questions. I don't think we'll take them now, but I know that there are a lot here, and I'm sure that we'll have another opportunity to adjust them as well. So I'd just like to thank everyone who's kindly taken the time to attend this session on making sense of valuations in the age of digital revolution by Professor Malcolm Smith. You can find Malcolm Smith, as he mentioned, on the elective modules of the MBA program, so which are venture capital and private equity, as well as negotiation skills. And in the event you have any further question, you can always get in touch with us on the website. So if you go to manchester.ac.ae, you can always request a callback to learn more about the MBA program. For those of you who are already students of the university, please feel free to get in touch with your program advisors as well, and your student advisors to learn more about the electives. And with that being said, wishing you all a very good evening here in the Middle East, and a good weekend as well. Obviously, it's Thursday afternoon here, so wishing you all well and stay safe. And once again, thank you very much, Malcolm, for your time and your insights. It's always very much appreciated. I'm sure they've all very much enjoyed this session.
Well, I certainly enjoy my relationship with the Middle East section, as you know. And you never know, I might be in the Middle East later this year.
We hope so.
We hope. It remains to be seen because everything's up for grabs. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you found it worthwhile. And if you've got any queries, just put them via the Middle East Centre. Okay, absolutely. Thanks very much. Thank you, William.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Take care, all of you, and have a very good weekend.